Now, depending on who you heard it from today, Dan Wootton was either fired officially by GB News, or he left on his own accord to launch his own independent platform. Either way, there's a lot to discuss because this firing wasn't really fair in my mind. That said, Dan Wootton is still a massive hypocrite. Welcome to Popcorn Planet. I am Andy Signor, and honestly, I'm torn. I'm not torn on my feelings on Dan, but I'm torn on how we treat him moving forward. Because look, like I've said, everyone deserves a path to redemption, but I cannot forgive this man or allow him to just keep peddling like he's the teller of truth when he refuses to acknowledge and address what he did to Johnny Depp. This man affected that UK verdict. It was him, the manager of The Sun at the time, who labeled Johnny the WB. Now, I've made a few videos expressing all that. I just want you to know that where I'm coming from in this piece as to why, again, if you're coming in for the first time on my Dan Wootton coverage, you understand why I still have an issue with him. Now, let's report on what the news is today, because Dan Wootton is reporting that he left GB News to launch his own independent platform. Meanwhile, his Byline Times, the one he's threatening to sue, has said he's been finally axed, as in fired from GB News because of the OfCom rules against channel and Misogyny row. Now, we're going to go through all of it. Plus, I want to break down what was actually said and talk about the... Look, I do think, regardless of my feelings on Dan Wootton, I can be unbiased. I think his firing in this case was not proper. Yes, he was rude. Yes, it was great. Even Laurence, the commenter who was on at the time, has acknowledged he could have said things better. But a lot of people have said things that OfCom has done nothing about. What is the rules here? It is odd. But let's break down what the two sides are saying. Now, let's go to Dan first. So here's his speech. I've left GB News to launch my own independent, outspoken platform, which will from later this year feature a brand new daily news and opinion show that will not be regulated by off-communist censors. However, yesterday's chilling OfCom report clearly raises far bigger issues. How can any broadcaster or publisher truly stand for freedom of expression when state goons have the power to decide what you are not allowed to say on air? Unlike the freedoms enjoyed in the U.S. thanks to the First Amendment, how can these media outlets ever be anything other than controlled opposition? As the epitome of the deep state, Liz Truss spoke about last week, the off-communists have once again shown themselves to be a muzzle that bows to the woke mob and only attacks those with whom it ideologically disagrees. Post office investigators, HMRC, the police, the country is full of organizations that have gone rogue and disobey the directives of ministers and the will of Parliament. It's not broadcasters who should feel fearful of carpeting from OfCom. It's OfCom that should be summoned by the supposedly conservative government to be reined in. Now, look, I'm going to say I agree with part of this. I'm going to explain why I believe OfCom was off base. That said, Dan and Laurence, you both have apologized and acknowledged the things you said weren't good. So this weird rewriting of history, that you shouldn't have apologized in the beginning, because it's all here on Twitter, which we can go through. And that's, again, what part of my problem with him. He's rallying this alarm bell, which is easy to ring, and it's not untrue. Similar to what Russell Brand's doing to avoid avoiding actually addressing his accusations. Russell Brand promised all this evidence. He's still yet to deliver any of it. All that said, it's easy to ring the alarm bell of the media's hiding from you when, sometimes we do make mistakes and need to take accountability. That's the problem here. Do I trust Dan to be that truth teller? Honestly, I don't. At the same time, it's very clear that he didn't leave GB News. I bet you he would have stayed had he been able, had they allowed him to. But as the details go, and Byline Times clearly has it out for him. They're clearly biased in their own right. But the judgment released Monday said solicitors on behalf of the licensees sent OfCom new evidence, which it said had been unable to send previously due to an internal employment process. Solicitors said this information supported the licensee's position that it had asked Mr. Wootton to read out an apology and he refused, but it had been unable to give OfCom this information until this point, as it was considered unfair to Mr. Wootton during an employment process. The licensee asked OfCom to delay publication of a decision of that. OfCom could consider the information. Given this detail, publication of OfCom's decision seemingly confirms that Wootton's internal employment process with GB News is over. So who left, who fired, whatever, that's for your decision. It's clear with this OfCom report, which was really around the comments that Laurence Fox made, which Dan didn't reel in. And he should have, to be honest. Dan knows this. He's acknowledged this. However, other things have been said, and do I really believe this was the thing that should have ended Dan Wootton? No. What he said about Johnny Depp and the falsities there should have ended Dan Wootton. So what did Laurence actually say? regardless of my feelings on Dan, let's actually talk about the truth. Let's break this down. And rather than read it, let's see it. Here's that clip again of what Laurence said on air.
We're past the watershed, so I can say this. Show me a single self-respecting man that would like to climb into bed with that woman, ever, who wasn't an incel, who wasn't a cucked little incel. That little woman has been fed, spoon-fed oppression day after day after day after day, starting with the lie of the gender wage gap. And she sat there, and I'm going like, if I met you in a bar and that was like sentence 3, chances of me just walking away are just huge. We need powerful, strong, amazing women who make great points for themselves. We don't need these sort of feminist 4.0. They're pathetic and embarrassing. Who'd want to shag that?
They're clearly in Dan's ear. They're clearly trying to rein him in, and Dan doesn't do anything about it because nobody wants to hear who this dude wants to bang. You're on television. Network television should and does have some rules. And sure, if you want to create a YouTube channel or say this on Twitter and fight for your freedom of speech, you go ahead. And honestly, it is what it is. Who cares who this guy wants to shag? I don't. Why would women? It's all just dumb. But there are rules.
Look,
Dan's laughing. Dan allowed it. Dan's still laughing. And we revealed that Laurence and Dan talked about this on air, and it was, before air, and Dan didn't say anything. So they were both in on this.
I'm just going to provide a touch of balance from her because she did actually.
So anyway, there it all is. Megyn Kelly coming in saying, I listened to the whole segment. You were mad. You were mad she was so easily wrote off the epidemic of men's suicide. It's true. Context is important. She absolutely did. She sounded heartless. You were making the point of how unattractive it made her to you. You didn't use the Queen's English, but what you said. Anyway, thanks, Megyn. I could and should have dialed down the barroom banter. But I've lost male friends to suicide, and her dismissal of male mental health is very upsetting to anyone who has experienced in such tragedy. We live, we learn. Now, I agree with Laurence here, and he's acknowledging it. I could have said it better. Sure, I did a little bit more barroom banter. That's the problem here. That's what he said. Any rational person would know that's what he meant, and you can shrug it off. And the reality is what Ava, the person who got away with Laurence and Dan being firing, what she said was, to me, more egregious. Here she is shrugging off male suicide and any male rights whatsoever.
Feeds into the culture a little bit, this Minister for Men argument.
This is Ava.
In my mind, I think there should be a Minister for Mental Health, which would be all-encompassing. I mean, you've got something like 7 million children waiting for prescriptions for mental health at the moment. It's a crisis.
She's the one Laurence doesn't want to shag. Sorry. And this is why, because of what all the things she's saying about dismissing men's mental health and male suicide, which this man's about to put her to task for.
That's endemic throughout the country, not specific to men. And I think, a lot of ministers kind of bandy this about to sort of, I'm sorry, but make an enemy out of women. I think, not you, and I don't think your book is. But I think Sunak.
I don't accept that. I don't think it is to make an enemy. If we looked at during COVID, men were literally more likely to die from COVID. And I don't really want to cast myself as a meninist or one of these guys from the manosphere, because that's not who I am. But I do find it interesting that sometimes the arguments tend to throw it back.
But who was doing all the work during COVID? A lot of the time, if you looked into people's households, it was the women who were taking on the laundry, the school care, all of that.
I'm not disputing any of that. What I'm saying that there are specific issues that men face that might warrant specific attention. I mean, literally, the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide. That is an arresting statistic. And if that doesn't warrant specific attention, mental health is an umbrella issue.
I have to say that is also because women are unsuccessful. That is a lot of feeds into that statistic.
But it feels like, it just doesn't feel like you've got any space for this idea that men might have unique challenges that face them. And the problem is, even as I'm saying this, in my mind, it's like I've got out the violin and I don't want to be.
Read the book.
I don't want to be this guy, because that's part of the problem. Is because you're encouraged on one level is men need to talk about their problems more, and then the moment you do it, you're like, all right, but not quite so often and not quite so.
Well said, brother. This guy's smart, and she absolutely dismissed him. And I could see why Laurence and Dan would be upset by this woman and her sort of shrug off of this whole thing.
So like you say, the book is more light-hearted than that, but it certainly goes around these issues.
Now here she is again, the woman that Laurence wouldn't shag. Here she is on Piers Morgan's show.
Without alpha, then they wouldn't be that bothered by this. Doesn't really help us when it comes to boys growing up. And that is one of my worries, that for teenage boys now, they are so terrified of the consequences of putting a foot out of line. It's hard enough being a young teenager, working out how things are, working out how to do dating and all of that, without the terror that if you touch in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may find that your whole life is destroyed.
See, I
and there
like
is
that
far
terror.
too much Well,
I like that.
As a mother of a teenage boy, I don't like
Really?
that
That's the
terror.
most malicious thing I've ever heard.
That is awful.
I think that men should be frightened
I think
to
you'd
touch
feel
women in a way
differently
that
if you
they're
were-
not
if you
comfortable
were-
with.
Yeah, but this Ava woman, who clearly a lot of people wouldn't want to shag because she's deplorable and doesn't care about men. Excuse me. Like she misses the whole point just to bash men. But Laurence is the misogynist. She misses the whole point. What this woman's saying is these poor kids who are out there like trying to give a woman a hug, thinking it's consensual, but suddenly the woman's like, oh no, I changed my mind. It happens all the damn time. And now with social media, everybody's a victim. Everybody's complaining about everything. And then they'll tweet it out. You tried to arm me when they didn't. We are in a place where it's so scary. And she wants all teens, all men to be terrified. I look, of course that there's lines, right? You don't force yourself. You don't do things unconsensual, obviously. But my God, that's the woman saying, how do you start a date? They have apps now for consent because it's gotten so bad. And this woman wants men terrified. This woman doesn't think men should have their own private space for mental suicide, to talk about the male suicide rate. All of that's sort of secondary. So yeah, of course this dude was upset. Meanwhile, Ava, the woman in question who rallied all these OfCom complaints, did a whole speech on why men won't shag me. Meanwhile, if you go to her other tweets, he's not going to shag you. I'm not going to shag you, pal. Laurence isn't going to shag you, mate. I'm not going to shag you, mate. She's all about talking about who's going to shag her for multiple tweets across her history and her timeline. But Laurence mentions it. Misogyny. And I want to go to what Lee Harris said as well. 2019, Joe Brand joked about throwing acid over Nigel Farage on the BBC. No further action from OfCom. 2020, Sophie Duker joked about killing white people on BBC. No further action. 2020, Miriam Margolis said she wanted Boris Johnson to die on Channel 4 while he was in the hospital with COVID. No further action. Laurence Fox makes misogynist comment about not wanting to shag a woman who's totally dismissing male suicide rates, and he broke OfCom rules. Whether you agree or disagree with the ruling, it's abundantly clear OfCom is biased and not fit for purpose. If Dan Wootton and Loza were leftists and it happened on Channel 4, you can guarantee the ruling would have been no further action. OfCom are a joke. It's hard to deny that. Here's another woman coming forward. Laurence Fox's comments were tacky and sexist, but he wasn't misogynistic. There was no expression of hatred of women. How absurd of OfCom to make this claim while expecting broadcasters to call trans-identified men women, erasing the very existence of women, is a real misogyny. Look, this is the problem. Everybody's got these opinions on what women, men, offense. For OfCom's off base, in my opinion, they are. As much as I will always dislike and still call Dan Wootton a hypocrite, he got stuck in a crossfire of media manipulation. So I can understand why he wants to use that to his benefit now to launch his new network. And it's an easy thing to rally on. But Dan, you got a lot you still have to atone for. Look, you have to address it. Lady C says, you were also bamboozled by Amber. A lot of people were. It's time to come clean. I will not stop the brakes on this until you take accountability for what you did to the man. I can't succeed, congratulate you here and be happy just because we like some of your other coverage of Harry and Meghan and other things you've done. There's a lot of stuff you need to atone for, and Johnny Depp is the one I really want to hold you accountable for because you said horrendous things to this man. You literally called him a pathetic excuse of a man. And how he's not canceled. He did it to himself. No, you did it, brother. And I know you regret it now. Who's tying up your hands? Because now it looks like your hands are untied. You have no boss. You have no leader. It's time to come clean. What can we do to untie your hands, Dan? Maybe you'll do it on your new platform. You'll try to monetize it there. I think it'll be a little less than disingenuous if you save it for there. Yeah, I think you should go to another platform to do it first to really do the media apology tour. Until then, I don't know, man. I can't take you seriously, and I can't feel sorry for you. I knew you'd do this, and good for you. Go make your own thing. Go get your bag. That's what people do. But we must hold people accountable for the words they said. And regarding Johnny, you said some of the most heinous things about the man, and you know they were untrue. So come forward, admit the truth, and let's all move forward, shall? Am I crazy, chat? I want to know what you think. Make sure, in the meanwhile, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for alerts, smash that like button. We'll be live later today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Look, we can't agree on everything, but I hope you can at least understand where I'm coming from on this, and hopefully we can respect each other in the comments. But leave the comments. Let's talk further. We'll be live in a little bit, so make sure you come join us if you see us live. live. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for more.